Hi, I'm Bill Warford, a columnist for the Valley Press and an English teacher at the Palmdale Aerospace Academy. And I want to talk today a little bit about the Antelope Valley and World War II veterans. I'm down here on Lancaster Boulevard, which is the site of the Lancaster Boulevard World War II monument. And that was placed in the 1940s. And it was to honor the Antelope Valley men and women who went to serve in World War II. And you see here, it's a monstrous structure. It's about 11 feet high. It weighs 8 tons. It had 709 names. There were 709 men and women from the Antelope Valley who went to serve their country in honor of those who from the Antelope Valley who served in the defense of their country, dedicated by American Legion Post 311. And not only was there a great tradition of people from the Antelope Valley at that time, you have to remember Antelope Valley was a very small community at the time, and to have 709 people answer the call is quite remarkable. So we've had thousands of people move here from other parts of the country who were World War II veterans as well. And back in the 90s, there was a Lancaster High School history teacher, Jamie Goodrow, who began inviting the veterans into her classroom. And that was a remarkable experience, both for the veterans and the students. If you think back in the early 90s, Tom Brokaw, the NBC News anchor, wrote the book, The Greatest Generation. And The Greatest Generation really kicked off the World War II generation beginning to speak out. These were the men and women who had gone through the Depression and then fought the war, came home and started families, and for many years they didn't talk about their experiences in the war. But after Tom Brokaw's book, that kind of broke the dam and people started to talk about it. And so that led to Ms. Goodrow inviting these veterans in to talk. And in my job at the Valley Press, I was able to interview a lot of them, and it was a remarkable experience for me as well. I think of Ty Killen, who lived just off the boulevard here. She was one of the Women's Air Corps pilots, and she grew up in Texas. And the Women's Air Corps, for those who don't know, were the women who flew the aircraft, like with the after the big bombers and all sorts of aircraft were made in the factories. They needed pilots to fly them to the bases where they were going to be used. And so they recruited women, and women pilots handled that duty. And for many years, they weren't given really their recognition. But all of this coming out in the 90s and talking about the war, that led to them getting their recognition. They received a congressional medal, a gold medal, back in 2010. And fortunately, Ty lived long enough to see that. She passed in 2011. I think of Harry Stulting, who was another veteran who was at D-Day. And I first heard about him when one of his coworkers called and said, "Hey, there's an engineer out here at Edwards Air Force Base who's still working. He's age 84. Would you like to interview him?" I said, "Sure." And it turned out that he had been in World War II and at D-Day. And he was a colonel at the time, and his job was to carry some of the maps and the battle plans for what they did once they got on the beach. And I remember him telling me, I'll never forget, I always share this with my students every year when we talk about D-Day. He said that coming up to the beach, the craft was being hit with bullets. And he said, have you ever been in a car in a hailstorm? I said, yeah. He said, that's what it sounded like, except these were bullets. And the pilot of his boat was killed immediately as soon as they opened the door. And they were able to get to the beach, however. But Harry, Bill Clutterham is another one who witnessed the bombing of the bomb on Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. Skip Lippert is another one, Pearl Harbor survivor, who wrote a letter to the editor. The Smithsonian back in the 90s was trying to do a little revisionist history and say that the war was a war of American aggression against Japan. Japan was only responding to American aggression. And Skip didn't take too kindly to that, and he wrote a letter to the editor. And I called him up and said, hey, let's talk about it, do a column. and he and I became friends for the rest of his life as well. So that's just a few of the many World War II veterans who have moved to the Valley and made it their home, and those students that learned from those classes were affected forever. They became lifelong friends, teaching them much more than they could ever learn from a textbook. And it is they that we remember on this Memorial Day as well.